This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with M.E Torrey. You're an author, and we're having you on the show for the first time. Welcome to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm doing great. Glad for
Right.
this opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here. I love to talk to creative people. We did this. We created this space to be able to talk to all kinds of creative people: actors, directors, authors, musicians. And you're an author. And we're going to talk about some topics today. But before we get to the start of that, a couple business points. We do have a QR code for Podmatch. Podmatch is a service that allows people to find guests and find hosts on podcasts and find each other. So if you take a QR code and scan that, you can check that out if you're somebody who wants to be a podcast guest or you're a podcaster looking for guests. That's how we book our guests on our show. Want to let people know about that. But when we get to the heart of your story, what we're going to talk about today, who tells the story of slavery and why it still matters. And we're also going to talk about your book, Fox Creek, a historical novel. So when we get started, one other thing I always ask any guest on the show, like what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
So that's my first question.
Yeah.
Just jump right in there. I'm glad. So I think what motivates me is just this deep sense of my responsibility toward issues of social justice. I've always felt that responsibility ever since I was little. I'm a child of the 60s, and I recall the civil rights demonstrations that would have been on our TV, the, let's say, marches that were led by MLK Jr. School integration was happening at that time. And so it was disturbing to me as a young child seeing those images on TV, the hatred and so on. And I was fortunate in that I lived with a family who we would sit around the dinner table after having perhaps seen something disturbing on TV, and we would discuss what it meant. And my father especially would always emphasize the how people are created equal, and that it didn't matter the color of the skin, that all of us were equal. And so then we'd discuss what happened on TV, why people were protesting, what was going on, and why people were against the protesters and so on. So from an early age, I just had this deep sense of social justice in my soul.
I think that's really important because I'm an African American. I can actually trace my wife is from Barbados, so we have two sides of that slavery issue. Where
Oof.
our family figured out on both sides, like my last name's Jones and my mom's name was Hall. Both sides of our family being African American, we can trace our slave holders. Our names are our slave masters' names, our last names. I don't know if people can understand what that means.
Yeah,
But as African Americans who've been in the country since like the 1600s, or like we can trace that back. So
right.
people tell us like, love it or leave it. We've been here longer than some people,
That's exactly right.
and social justice, being in, unless you decide not to pay attention. When
Exactly.
you're African American, I'm a child of the '70s. I had to deal with busing,
Yeah.
and I had to deal with people going to school. First day, they were calling me names back
Oh,
in 71, 72. So I have, you just have to understand it. People don't want to understand it, but I'm glad that you actually grew up talking about it because a lot of people don't like to talk about things that are hard.
right,
I think it's really cool that you do.
right.
Uh,
Yeah. My family didn't change the channel. We watched it.
yeah, you don't go to switch to a sitcom, switch to sports. Yeah, that's what people like to do. So like the interesting thing that you do is like you create a historical novel. It's not nonfiction, right? It's actual fictional representation, but you've done research it's historical, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, it began with a trip to Louisiana that I really hadn't been expecting. I was an author at that time for children's books and actually had a 20-year career as a children's book author. I had planned to go to New Orleans to write a ghost story based in New Orleans for a young adult audience. I tagged along with my husband because he had a conference, and so I did a bunch of research before I went. Got in New Orleans, and nothing was happening in my head regarding the ghost story. It just wasn't
Was it
coming
coming?
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so but I'd always wanted to see plantations as well. I'd always had an interest in African American history, especially with the slaveholding history. And
Mhm.
so I rented a car, drove myself up north by the Mississippi, north of Baton Rouge, and visited some plantations. And what happened was something that really changed the trajectory of my life and my writing. Um, while I was there visiting the plantations, and I'm a northern girl, so I was naively expecting a balanced history when I went there.
Yeah.
I know, I laugh now. But what happened was it was just white history, and it was the very, very kind docents, often dressed like Scarlett O'Hara, and they would, tell the history of the white family, give you the tour of the big house, and not once was slavery or slaves mentioned, and I was blown away by that.
Mhm.
I
That's
just couldn't believe it, and it happened plantation after
a
plantation.
plantation, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's
So,
that's super interesting.
it's clear to me that, that our history about that era was being whitewashed, um, and it disturbed me so much that I came home on fire, ready to, write about it, and so I decided to write a historical novel, turned out being called Fox Creek, that really explored the white narrative, the slaveholding narrative, as it intersects with that slave narrative. I wanted both voices in
Both
there.
voices, yeah.
So and I could s I wanted to see what happens when you genuinely try to represent both worldviews, and so that's what I did with Fox Creek, and it ended up being, a novel for adults, not young adults.
Yeah, I think it's like it's super important for people to understand that like the Confederacy, the whole Union Confederacy Civil War is like people have been like refighting that and kind of trying to reframe it for like since it ended.
Mhm.
And we're living in a world right now where people are just getting rid of all aspects of like African American culture as being somehow woke.
Right,
And it's so disturbing because what you saw was like the precursor of what we see with the woke.
right.
We've I grew up in the 70s feeling that kind of energy. I lived in suburban neighborhoods, outside of Boston. They were Irish and Portuguese, and they were extremely anti my family being there. And this
Oh,
is in the North. So
yeah,
this is outside of Boston, like Stoughton, Massachusetts, and in the early 70s. So, we've had to deal with this if you choose. My father chose to be like integrated because he believed in what Dr. King was talking about.
mhm.
So that we could go to a better school. If you live in the suburbs, you go to a better school. I ended up going to college. My brother went to Harvard, he's a lawyer. I went to Bowdoin. I'm in tech. And like, in order to do that, you have to push yourself and be in a place that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And so I think what you're talking about actually pushes people's buttons because they don't really want to know about it. So that other side that you're saying, when you went to all those plantations and they were only telling one side, and it really got you upset. So what was the reaction to people who read your book? Were there people that were already believing what you write, or did you have people that got converted from what you wrote?
I've had people tell me that they read things in my book that they'd never known before, they hadn't understood before. Now, I didn't necessarily really probe on that to say, "Well, what exactly?" But the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, even from white people, but what's interesting is, I'll have conversations with people, "Oh, you write a book. Oh, what is it?" And so on. And then when I tell them and, we might get into the subject of race, and I might say something about perhaps, as an example, white privilege. Um, boy, is that a hot button.
Yeah.
And it's like immediately, with some people, immediately I am stiff-armed.
Yeah, put in the corner.
Stiff-armed, and they are made to feel very uncomfortable immediately, and I am honestly, I shouldn't be surprised, but I am surprised that
Mhm.
they're so defensive that they won't even have the conversation. The conversation cannot happen for them. And so I ponder that, I'm sure it might be different reasons for different people, but I think overall I might be able to just say there is a lot of guilt, and it does make white people very uncomfortable
Yeah.
to look back on that time in history with an openness, not only of the heart, but of the mind too, and be able to look at it honestly.
Yeah, you have to be self-reflective. You're kinda
Yeah,
like the Victorians' idea of the looking glass self, right? You have to have critical thought, critical thinking, self-analysis, be self-aware, and not be so triggered by the shame and the guilt,
right.
because shame and guilt, they have a lot of has a negative, like, bad loop effect on people's lives. They get locked into it. They find a way, a path to get around it. A lot of it's like pushing things down. I've talked to a lot of therapists that talk about that, and I was a sociology major, so we talk about the microcosm and the macrocosm and anatomy and all these social ills, and what happens in the family at the microcosm level, like, bleeds into the macrocosm, and they bleed back and forth.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
you get these social mores where it's better to push it down. It's better not talk about it. It's better to not feel guilty, not feel shame.
Right. Right. So a comment that I might get would be, "That wasn't me. I didn't live back then. That time is dead and gone, and I'm living my life right now, and I'm just doing me."
That's the interesting thing about that is, I work in the insurance industry. I work in software, and insurance companies in their libraries have the slave policies of showing that the people were property. I've
Yes.
actually, when I worked at one of the big insurers, I actually went to the library, and one of my uncles said, "Go check that and see if you can find one." And I actually found them on the microfiles and then the stuff in the archives of some of these big companies.
Yeah.
And it's like that people don't. It's like the reason why you should know about it is because there are people who have their legacy, their wealth, their privilege built on unpaid labor, right? I'm part Native American, Blackfoot, and Cherokee, and they stolen land.
Yeah.
So like it's a big deal to us.
Right. Absolutely.
So you might not want to hear it, but
Yeah.
the Middle Passage was a thing.
Yes.
You might not want to learn about it because it makes you feel upset. But it's like people don't want to hear about something that makes them, because like there's a whole kind of fantasy, not exactly a fantasy, about the whole idea that like our country being founded and it's all this freedom. But when you
Mhm.
read the Constitution, it says we're three fifths of a human,
Right.
and nobody took it out.
Yeah.
So being a educated, African American, I kind of question like, what is that?
Yeah.
I think that's like the source to me of the
Mhm.
problem. You don't address that, how are you going to address anything?
Right. Right. One of the In my book, Fox Creek, one of the major reasons why the slaveholding South wasn't willing to, like, give up slaves is, like you said, first of all, the property, but secondly, the amount of money that was invested in the purchase of each of those individuals was huge. Slaves weren't cheap. To own a slave back then, my book starts in 1843, and a male slave in the prime of his life would have sold upwards of $1,000 in those days.
That's a
You
lot of
put that
money.
in today's money, man, that's some heavy money. And so, for them, it made them enraged that the North would tell them, "Well, just free your slaves." And they're thinking, "Well, wait a second. I spent I first of all, I legally purchased them, and then I spent all this money. Where's my compensation? Where is the labor force to replace it? And so, and that was a huge economic consideration, and it made people, I mean, money today makes people hot under the collar. So for them, it was a matter of money. It was a matter of how our economy runs. Um, yeah, it's just,
That's interesting because today we still have, kind of indentured servant
mm,
situations going on all over the world,
yeah,
right? And even have some levels of slavery still going on all
yes,
over the world. And then now we've got prisons that are industrial prisons that, even after 1865, the so-called free slave, if he walked wrong down the street or walked down, on a train track, they found these laws to put him back in the plantation, back in the prison. So the
right,
prison industrial complex has existed since 1865
right,
to 66. Is still being kind of used today with this warehousing they're starting to do now.
right.
So like people don't learn something. I think what we see today is like a repetition of the bad behaviors not ever being addressed and never really, accounted for.
Right, and that's the key, and unless white Americans are finally ready to do a reckoning with their past, and I don't mean a reckoning in terms of guilt, I mean a reckoning in terms of just basically being accountable for being part of that legacy. Unless we're willing to do that, what you said will continue to repeat and repeat and repeat.
Yeah, because I mean, I think some people, there's a point where some people are like, "Oh, well, how can somebody that's not African American write about slavery?" But, historians write about things and they're not of the culture. Like, people write about, Native Americans, they write about the Japanese, they write about anybody.
Right.
Anthropologists can always talk to anybody. I mean, you write fiction, it's different to being an anthropologist, but I think it's the same perspective to me
Yeah,
because it's good for somebody to step outside their own culture and
yeah,
actually learn about another and going through the process of doing the research, doing the work to be the creative and create a piece of work, art.
yeah,
It actually is going to have like a social conscious message to it because you pointed out that that's was something you're into. Um, and that's not, to say that it's woke. I think it's important
yeah,
to have empathy, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
So do you think that did you get you said your book was really people didn't give you a lot of critical like back you didn't get anybody criticizing it, but were people criticizing like the fact that tried to do the topic that you as a white person doing this topic, did you get any criticism for that from certain areas?
Yeah, I haven't really yet. Now I've been asked the question, but they've given me space to give my answer, and my answer is, well, first of all, um I had a lot of trepidation about putting out this book because I'm a white woman and, my main character is a young Black woman, and so I had some trepidation, would would this be well received? And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you're gonna, quote unquote, you're gonna get crucified." And so I was honestly scared. And then I realized that I'm not trying to write over Black voices or suppress Black voices. In fact, that's the opposite of what I wanna do. What I wanna do is add to the discussion,
Yeah.
and if I can, start the discussions, especially in corners where people haven't necessarily been willing to start the discussions, and maybe my door is really to open the doors to the white privilege and walk through those doors and be able to talk to people in a way that they might be able to accept.
But I think the fact that you're coming from this culturally different place,
Yeah,
um, actually is opening a door.
Yeah.
And I think when people are willing to kind of bridge the gap, right, to actually go and learn about another culture and then kind of become immersed in it to the point where they feel comfortable telling the story. And there's a lot of examples of that. Like, I love music. I'm a musician, and a lot of American music is like rooted in African American tradition, from Delta blues to jazz, to rock and roll. It's like kind of our DNA.
Right.
And we always like, okay, if a white guy can do it, if Elvis can do it, you know, he can do it. So we never had a problem. Like, yeah, if you get it, Jerry Lee can do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't care. It's like, if you play the jazz and you show up with Brubeck and Miles looked at them and said, yeah, there's no problem,
Yeah.
because you feel it. If you feel it and you understand it, then we're like, okay, I don't have an issue. We tend not to have issues with that, because
Right.
we see they're coming from a good place. If we feel your vibe, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it has to come from a place, first of all, of knowledge, of authenticity, of having done my homework, and then it has to be done for the right reasons.
Yeah, it feels like what you're saying is you want to open that door. You want to have that discussion. Then why is it so taboo
Right.
with some folks to even bring it up to the point where now people want to remove books, remove murals, remove artwork, remove mentions, because the guilt is so bad
Yeah.
that you can't even deal with a fact. History is a fact. If there's a historic fact, you don't want to see it. And so, like, that to me is like a cancer.
Yeah.
It's like a disease. And I think the more people can talk, like you said, you build that bridge,
Right.
and you
Absolutely.
might have an easier way coming through the door than somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you feel the acclaim you've gotten and the awards you've gotten have made it like more like a lot easier to kind of get your book discussed and have more people read it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the critical acclaim, the awards that it has won is really important to having people read it, getting it in libraries, hopefully starting discussions, not necessarily with me even being a part of the discussion, but maybe book groups and so on can start their own discussions, and yeah, that is really my hope.
Have you gone and done like a tour to have like webinars or like TEDx like talks, or have you done the kind of tour, a speaking tour with it, or even just just the start of it?
I actually haven't. In fact, it hasn't even occurred to me, so now that you mention it, it might be something that I would look into.
Yeah, I
I
would think
was
it's like colleges. Like, you could go to a lot of colleges and talk to, like, the different you know departments, English departments, history departments, African American studies programs.
exactly,
They might be very interested in having you do a symposium and
right,
having a discussion, and that's like the perfect place where you can get, you have that critical thinking, and you come on a college campus. That's the point,
exactly,
to be able to have that discussion. In a bookstore, maybe you can do it, but the college is definitely the place you can do it.
exactly. Bookstore, not so much, yeah.
Yeah, bookstores might not be looking for it, they're looking for the thing that sells the most money.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
gives them the biggest, hit, is more pop culture, but, um, so, like, a lot of movies depict slavery. Everybody, I grew up in the '70s, we saw Roots, the miniseries. That was a big pivotal thing that kinda made people aware.
Right.
Um, what makes your book unique and special compared to something like Roots, or, that's kind of the last time I heard anybody even really talking about it was like Roots, or it's something on PBS, or maybe it'll be a PBS discussion of the Civil War and stuff like that. But what do you think?
Right, I think well, Roots was seminal. I mean, it really was. It was I remember it came out, I think I at this time, I was in Germany, and I was attending an American military school. And so we were always like a year behind everything that happened in the United States. I remember it came out for us in when I was in 11th grade or so, and
Mhm.
my U.S. history teacher, he was all over it, man. He
Oh,
just thought
right.
it was just cat's meow. And so he talked to us a lot in class about roots and about what it had shown kind of the American public, a story that they hadn't really seen before. Um, my book, I think what's unique about my book, and there are other books out there that might offer the same treatment, but my book really takes the white perspective, and I try to be true to what I believe would have been representative of their worldview.
Mhm.
Try to present them as actual human beings, which of course slaveholders were, and they had their faults, but they had their good sides too. If you were to meet them today, you know, in public, you would go, "Oh, that was a really nice fellow." You know, he loves his family. He takes care of, you know, his land. He does his civic duty. If a friend is sick, he'll send over some hands, as they called them, to plow their field for them. You know, on it, they went and voted. You know, so they felt like they were good people, and I wanted to present that honestly. And then there's that underbelly side to them, which was actually accepted by society. And so they don't question it too deeply. Very few of them actually had moral quandary about this. If they did, they weren't saying. So I have some characters who accepted slavery as like part and parcel of everything they know, and life couldn't exist well without it. And then others who question it somewhat, but it
Mhm.
will. And then others who like, this
Yeah,
isn't
like
right.
abolitionist by mindset, because, like, the thing about it that's very contradictory to me is the fact that the Constitution is talking about, like, all this liberty and we have freedom, of, the right to have this, the right to have property, the right to pursue all these rights. But it's really, if you think about it, like, the women couldn't vote,
Right.
right? The indentured servants couldn't vote.
Yeah.
Um, people who actually didn't own land, a lot of times the workers couldn't vote.
Right.
So it was still coming from this kind of aristocracy that had come over
Yeah.
and put it down on paper that's this big ideal better than Athens. But still, it was really meant for, if you read James Baldwin, you read some, W.E. Du Bois, it's like there was a critical analysis of what is really going on here.
Right.
And so there's a moral quandary with when you try to say, that you're a good person, but then the problem I have is like, well, the Bible was kind of telling them that we're the sons of Cain.
Yeah.
So you justify it religiously, you justify it through other means, and then you can say, "Well, I'm a good person."
Right.
But it's like at the end of the day, human beings are human beings. If
Right.
you see the human being as a piece of property,
Right.
you're not so good.
Right. So it is, I mean, it's full of hypocrisy. It's full of contradiction. And I made sure all of that was in there. And what I tried not to do was I tried not to impose my author bias onto any character. And I do have my biases, you know, as I write them. And I try to instead be true to that worldview. Whoever my viewpoint character is at the moment I'm writing it, I am true to them. Um, and you know, that creates an authenticity in the book that I don't think many books have. Now,
Yeah.
I wanna also talk about this, the slave point of view that I wrote. You know, for both white and slaves, I read, you know, diaries, autobiographies, journals, letters, whatever was available, many, many, many different writers to get a broad perspective. But what was different about the slave narratives that I read versus the white narratives is the whites were literate. They were allowed to read and write. Slaves, it was against the law for them to know how to read and write. So a slave could be born on a plantation, live their whole life in complete illiteracy, along with all their people that they lived with, and then die on that same plantation. You're not going to read their diary, okay? So whose diaries do we read? We read the diaries and the autobiographies of people like Frederick Douglass, people like Jacob Stroyer, I think his last name was, the guy who was, who wrote 12 Years as a Slave,
Yeah,
Solomon.
yeah, you have some of the people that
Yes,
actually were
we
living.
read about the people who escaped,
Yeah,
okay? And
the
that's
massacres.
an exceptional subset of people who were willing to risk their lives and maybe even the lives of their family to get their freedom. No matter what, they're gonna get their freedom. That wasn't everybody,
Yeah,
okay?
not everybody's able to do that when you're under the thumb of, like, a really powerful structure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
like you're in a prison, I mean, basically,
right, and so you're gonna have all kinds of personalities on the in the plantation, out in the quarters. You're gonna have everybody from the completely obedient to the firebrand who will escape at all costs and everybody in between. And then the other source of material that I had was from the Federal Writers Project, and that was conducted in the 1930s. It was done by Roosevelt during the Depression to give writers a job. So writers would go to interview ex-slaves,
oh,
and
wow,
so you have this oral
documented.
history that was recorded. Have you ever read any of the Writers Project?
I think when I took African American history at Bowdoin that we went over, reviewed some of that
Yeah,
work.
yeah, you probably did. And there's a good one, called, well, a good book that's called Bullwhip Days. I forget who the editor is, but it's a compilation of some of those oral histories from Writers Project.
So you
But
sourced really good well, I
yes,
mean, you got a lot of good sources because you went and found that historical, like,
right.
interview level stuff that was after, probably during, Reconstruction,
Yeah,
after Reconstruction, way, way after, I
yeah.
mean, Roosevelt, you're talking about, like,
So
FDR days, but, New Deal days, but,
exactly. So the problem then with the oral histories is all of the people giving the oral histories were children
mhm.
when they were slaves. And so again, you have a subset of the population. The person you will never hear from are the ones who were born, lived, died completely illiterate. That was most of them.
Yeah, it's a
And
lot of
so
them.
all I can do is, as a fiction writer, is do my best. Try to fill in the blanks, try to imagine, some of the oral histories they would tell about their mothers and their fathers and their grandmothers and so on. My grandma came over from Africa and, she died, at age whatever, and she never did, learn to speak English or never did read and write, and so those are the people whose stories you'll never get.
Yeah, that's the problem, well, I mean, that's the kind of pain of it, like, I
Yeah,
talk about, like, the middle passage, and then also if you are not allowed to control your labor, control your freedom, your individuality is like that's a level of, destruction to a societal structure, like, to a culture. If a culture really can't hand down a lot, other than their grit, and their determination to live, for
right.
everybody that lived through the middle passage, that's a lot of grit
Yeah,
to be able to live through that and then live through the actual slavery, right? And then survive it. And then, in that world, like, that's where the blues came out of.
yeah,
That's where the music, yeah, so they might not speak English, but they still had some of their own language. They still had their own ways of expression. And a lot of the music and the oral history is just like Native Americans. There's a lot of oral history. And some of that oral history, if the grandparents were still around, they would tell their kids and they might know it within families, you know?
exactly, just like Alex Haley.
Yeah, that's the kind of, it's a lot of depth, but it's like the thing that's interesting to me is when people talk about American history and then they have African American history.
Yeah,
African American history is American history.
yes.
So it's like it's not separate. It's not. And to me, the problem when you do that, you make it almost like it's optional.
Exactly.
And I remember when I went to Bowdoin, that I went and took a lot of African American up to, like, 401 as an elective, just because I had access the stuff that I didn't have in high school, like
Right.
Dr. King's and Malcolm X's speeches. I actually interviewed Stokely Carmichael, came to the college. I actually talked to him. I talked to Ed Bradley. I mean, I was able to get access to a lot of stuff, so I could get like a deeper vision of what was going on. People in SNCC I could talk to. I mean, I was able to get a lot of information that we're not. You have to look for it. You have to want to find it. It's not like given to you.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's part of the battle. If everybody talks about STEM, I'm in IT, STEM is important. However, history is super important.
Mhm.
You know, Philosophy and ethics are important.
Yes.
You can't just have blind capitalism with no moral clarity, no
Right.
philosophy. Don't read Camus and Sartre. You don't read the ethicists. You don't read Thomas Paine. You don't read the Constitution. Actually, read it, or
Right.
the articles, the initial documents that structured our whole Federalist Papers, all that stuff. If you take somebody else's word for it, you don't actually do the work, then you don't really understand America to me. Like, you need to actually dive deep, and you dove into a sector, like an area that usually is not really given a lot of weight.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Good comments. Powerful.
because like the blindness of ordinary people, I think that was a great statement from Dr. King.
Mhm.
It said like the people on the left wing is like, you don't really help us, right? If you don't, there was this whole thing of like sometimes the liberals like are cool to be there, but they can kind of get in the way of the movement because they're not willing to do the real work.
Mhm.
If you're not really willing to do the work, you don't really push it, where you don't really like go and push on your families. Like, why can't we talk about it?
Right.
Like, why don't you know any African American history? Why don't you know about the Middle Passage? Like, why don't you know about this? And he choose to not want to, understand the plight of your fellow man. That's a
Right.
decision. And a non-decision is still a decision.
Right.
And so
Yes.
there's a lot of like momentum in that being lethargic of not, and so the weight of people who don't make decisions, that don't take actions, that don't want to know, ends up being just as powerful as people that might be like in a white citizens council, or there might be in Aryan Nation, or they might be in the KKK. Like, just because you're not in that doesn't mean that you don't affect the momentum of that.
I think a good example of that in the, slave South was the sample of white population, which I think was probably the majority of slaveholders. They're like, "Well, I don't really like slavery, but I was born into it, and, I've got this plantation, I've gotta run it, it's how my family earns money, so okay." And they don't speak out against it, they just go with the flow. And I think the majority of them were like that. The majority of them were not, the
Yeah.
Jeff Davis
Jefferson
giving
Davis.
his
Yeah.
speech on the floor of Congress, before he became president of the Confederacy. Most of them weren't like that. They weren't eloquent about anything having to do with slavery. They just shut up about it.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. Like, if a totalitarian comes in, you look at what happened in the lesson of the 30s, with like, if you don't stop, like, a lot of people ran away from Mussolini and Hitler. They saw it coming and they left.
Right.
Other people thought they could negotiate, but you
Yeah,
can't negotiate with a tyrant.
I know.
And if you have a philosophy that's tyrannical and you just go with the flow, eventually one day that emperor decides, or that structure decides, that you're a problem.
Right,
And then the problem is now yours. It
right.
wasn't your problem until it is.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah, there's a poem and I can't remember the author, but a poem on the wall of the Holocaust Museum, and it you might recall it, and I'm gonna totally paraphrase it and probably butcher it, but it says something like, "They came for the Jews, and I didn't say anything, and they came for this person, I didn't say anything," and it goes on, and then it finally says, "And then they came for me, and there was no one left to
Yeah,
speak."
that's the problem, because I
Yeah,
think a lot of times the people don't understand, like, if you have a structure, like, there was the machinery of, like, the whole cotton system of the sugar plantations, there was a reason for the profit. Like, if you don't, like, it's the same reason if you go into anywhere in the world where we grab like, the raw materials to in the supply chains,
right,
right? You need that lithium, to make the lithium ion battery. You might have child labor to do that. You don't want to talk about it because you like your smartphone.
right,
But the same thing's going on today, but people don't want to talk about it. Some people talk about it, but other people don't. I think that's the same kind of mirror in the 21st century. There's stuff going on like that with rare earth minerals all over the planet, and the people mining them aren't really getting that. They're not being treated that fairly.
right. I did a master's degree in religion, in the 2000s and graduated in 2006, I think. And my master's was in eco justice. And eco justice talks about the very thing, about how due to economic privilege, or just power, might, money, uh, corporations or countries will set up manufacturing facilities or whatnot, waste fields in areas where the people are so poor or so powerless that they can't fight against it. And so their water ends up polluted, or they have to leave because they're too sick to stay. That's eco justice. It's about, marginalized communities becoming even more marginalized.
Yeah, I think it's like indentured servants to me.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of people are like they're getting paid way less than equitable cost. Economic environmental damage is not being addressed. So the cost of the product, the profit is the high motive, but the worker doesn't get paid. Like that's the problem we even with AI today.
Right.
Now what's going to happen in the next 10 years is a lot of people who've never had that kind of economic justice situation,
Mhm.
a lot of white collar, a lot of
Mhm.
blue collar, a lot of union people are going to find out what happens when the means of production decides like we don't need the worker.
Yeah.
And so like we're going into a phase where there's going to be, and the problem is like, oh, it's technology. Technology always does that. But the problem today is this tech is doing it at all industries at once,
Mhm.
super fast, and that's never been done.
Right.
And so there's a lot of people who are going to feel that effect. And we're not really taught critical thinking. If you're critical thinking, oh, you can be an entrepreneur. You could go create your own business. You can get another job. We've been taught to kind of be on the assembly line or in
Mhm.
the cube. And if you can't get out of that mindset, there's going to be a problem
Yeah.
because it's almost like you're in that, like you're almost like 21st century illiterate to the ability to be able to get out of your class or be able to have upward movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there are parallels to understanding, having empathy for a slave, right? And then understanding there are people who are wage slaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people like you're talking about the situation with the rare earth minerals is like there are indentured servants, there are people who are marginalized, and if you only think that greed is good, that the capitalism is always like the best solution with no ethics or morality. Um, I think that's the kind of idea like a Calvinism
Yeah.
concept of like, do you actually feel because you have wealth that makes you closer to being like more righteous, more pious?
Right.
than somebody who doesn't have wealth. So the slave doesn't have any wealth. So they must deserve the position they're in. Was that the kind of mindset? Like if they're in the slave, then the order, the theological order said, well, that person doesn't deserve to be at the top of the chain.
That's interesting. So, um, having a master's in religion, and then religion is a part of Fox Creek. Monette is my main character, and she is at some point when she's owned by the Genzi family, she is taught catechism. They belong to the Episcopal Church. She's taught a catechism along with the other household servants because some of them have been misbehaving. And it's Sarah, the mistress, it's her idea to, if she gives them catechism, that they might stop misbehaving. Now, this catechism is an actual historical one that I got off of a microfiche. And it
Mhm.
was, I think it's copyrighted back in the late 1830s, so it would have been available to her in the 1840s. It's Episcopalian, and it was written specifically as a catechism for masters to give to slaves.
Mhm.
And so when you read it, it is specifically tailored to keep slaves in their place. And they use the story of the Apostle Paul when he receives a letter from, now I'm forgetting how the story goes, but I guess someone's slave, Onesimus, had run away. Onesimus pleads with the person that he ran away to write to the Apostle Paul on his behalf. And uh, the Apostle Paul will then say, okay, you know, neither slave nor free, neither, Jew nor Greek, neither male nor female, this guy needs to be free. But instead, the Apostle Paul says, no, you belong to this other guy. Onesimus needs to go back.
Mhm.
And so they sent Onesimus back to his master. And this is used as a like cautionary
Justification.
tale
Yeah.
for teaching the slaves. And they also went so far as to say, it's all question and answer, question and answer. What do you do when your master asks you to do something? You do it with all your heart. What do you do? What happens to you if you disobey? You get punished. Is God pleased with you when you disobey? No, God is very angry. Will you go to the lake of fire and brimstone if you continue to disobey? Yes, you will.
Yeah. That's like using, you know, theological structure
It's it's
to
a
like,
weapon. Yeah, they used it as a weapon.
yeah, and that's where it becomes like that's the moral question
Yeah,
of like if you say all men are created equal, and then you do that.
yeah,
So basically, it goes back to what I said. Well, it says we're 3/5 of a human, so you're already structurally saying that we're not human, right? And then you're also looking for biblical reasons to support that.
right.
And so that makes you feel like, well, I'm righteous. I'm a
Mhm.
good, pious person because I'm just following what's in the legal book and the more in the constitutional book. so
Right,
then you say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. And the problem is like, well, there's a judgment. I'm Buddhist. There's a higher level judgment that's beyond whatever man does. It's like universal law, right? Of what you do for karma. The
right.
energy you put out, the energy you put back. If
Yeah,
what you do has a negative effect on another human being, no matter what artifice you put around it
right.
to try to get it around it, that's just manipulation. That's not really what it is.
I agree totally.
And I think
Doctor
that's the hard
that's
part for people to get into because they don't wanna get to that.
I think they don't understand how we're all so connected. They think it's just them. Dr. King said, "An injustice anywhere is an injustice
Everywhere, everywhere.
everywhere." Yeah. And that's speaking to that same idea of we're all connected. What you put out, you're gonna get back. Yeah.
Yeah, because when he died, he was helping sanitation workers.
Yeah.
He was looking at the Vietnam War and said it was not just.
Right.
And even the Kennedy Johnson administration, like, they didn't like that
Right.
because, like, he wasn't gonna just fit whatever narrative they wanted. Like, I'm a free thinker.
Right.
Dr. King was a free thinker, like, W.B. Du Bois, like any of the great black thinkers is like, I'm just as much in my critical thinking as anybody. And just because the government says this doesn't mean I say, well, that doesn't look true to me.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So he's like,
Exactly.
you got to say what you feel is the right thing. It's like, so that's a hard thing to deal with because people want to like live within structures. They want to live within paradigms. They want to live within like the social mores
Right.
because there's like you get punished if you go outside of it. Like you said, they like the slave is going to get punished if they don't obey the master because that's the law. That's the divine law.
Right.
And
So in my book, the mistress Sarah, she's one of those ones who does question it, but she doesn't question it enough to like critically think, well, this really is wrong. She questions it, but then the Bible and the catechisms like this, the one I just talked about, help her come to a sense of peace, feeling like she's doing God's will in looking after the flock that God has given her to care for. So that's kind of her justification of how she makes peace in her own head so that she doesn't go crazy. But then there is an atrocity that she actually does and pushes behind her once it happens.
yeah, because it's still she can kind of once you come up with ways to like explain
Exactly.
things, then you can kind of put it under the rug.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when today, like we otherize people
Yeah.
based on skin tone, language, accent. It used to be like migrants were migrants, and now they're illegal.
Right.
If an alien came to this planet and saw a human being, they said, "Well, it must. Human beings are a natural being that belongs on planet Earth. Nations are constructs.
Yeah.
Animals migrate.
Mhm.
There's no nation for an animal. They don't need a green card to go from Iceland to Australia to go anywhere. They go wherever they natural migrations. To me, like, okay, if capitalism is a natural process and I should be able to economically go do whatever I want, how come I can't migrate with
Yeah.
all this leverage? And the leverage tends to be somewhat like slavery in terms of if you don't speak the right language, you don't have the right tone, you don't have the right culture, you can't optimally go to where you actually could be utilized. You actually could do better here. So if this resource is capable of being the next best physicist in the world, but they can't come because they're an immigrant,
Mhm.
then how is that free market?
Right.
See, right there, you have another paradigm problem that it goes back to the same problem that you had with slavery.
Yeah.
People aren't thinking. They're not critically thinking about what's going on. So your book can open up like a gate to like, if you look at that, what's the parallel happening now?
Yeah. For me, it's pretty clear. I do think a lot of people are kinda lazy.
Yeah, they don't do the work.
Thinking, it can be hard and uncomfortable at times, especially when you think into spaces that may infringe on your freedoms, your, way of life, and the way you've always believed yourself to be in the world. If you have to reevaluate that, who wants to do that? So, yeah, it could be pretty tough.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, like if you allow people to be as efficient as possible, economists have looked at like racism and sexism, actually affect GDP. Economists have actually looked at it and said, well, if you didn't have it, you would actually increase GDP. But the mindset is, oh, diversity reduces GDP,
Yeah,
but it does. That's a false construct.
right.
And so, if people are in that mindset that diversity reduces GDP, so then they're going to become less diverse, less tolerant of other cultures and other people, and it's not actually true. It's just as not true as what was in the Bible saying that you have to follow the master.
Yeah,
So I think that if people are kind of lazy. They don't people don't read today, you know. So do you have an audio book of your book, or do you
It's
or you
actually being created right now. It's half done, being narrated. Kendra Woods is my narrator.
Mhm.
Um, and I've listening to, her narration right now
She's
and earmarking, "Okay, this word needs to be pronounced like this," and so on. So we're working our way through that, and initially, our production, finish date was at the end of February, but it's not gonna be done at the end of February.
it's like a
I'm
movie. It's like a movie production. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah. So, it's better that we do a good job and get it done right, and, so I don't imagine that it would be out any earlier maybe than mid-April.
But I think it's really important because, a lot of young people, a lot of people on the go, they don't the audio book is a new way of consuming literature.
Yeah,
And if you can get more people to become, audio auditory literacy,
right,
they can get people to get into something that they physically don't have the time to pick up the book or pick up the Kindle. They're in the commute, they're on the plane, they're in the bus, they're on the Uber. If they can do that, then they actually consume that material, so you can get people to engage
yeah,
and get
yeah,
pulled into your work.
yeah. My mother, she's read it, but normally she listens to audio because her eyes are so bad that it's
Yeah,
a
that's
struggle,
another problem.
you
Yeah, as
know?
I get older, man, I got glaucoma, so I'm like, I'm not looking forward to that. So,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, as you get older, things happen, but yeah, they having audiobooks is a cool thing for me too.
yeah. I'll send out an announcement when the audiobook is available.
Yeah, I just think it's super engaging, to have you, like, take on the work that you did because you did a lot of research, you actually did the work, and then you had the creative license, that's what I love about creative people. Is, somebody could go and do like an anthropology, be a historical nonfiction and try to write like about a specific incident or specific issue. But when you humanize it through storytelling,
Right.
I think you can get more people because how many people are going to read like a textbook?
Few. Yeah,
That's in the college. You can get the college kids to you get it on this, the syllabus. Then they'll read it, but you're not going to get if you do it like the way you're doing it. You can get wider adoption, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, hopefully my book will help bridge that gap. Yeah, help inform and yet I'm a storyteller at heart, so I just am always creating stories and always playing with the characters and what can happen next, and yeah,
But I think stories are like how we consume. You know, Everybody tells a story. Authors are the best. Creative. They can actually engage at a deeper level than just the everyday stories that we tell each other. That
yeah,
you can actually, you build like this, a world. Somebody gets drawn into that world. They get drawn into the story. They understand the message. So if you were gonna like close, like what are like three like messages or lessons learned from your novel that your characters experience?
I think the most important lesson is to, whenever I've thought about slaveholders before, or when I've heard white people talk about them, if they're willing to talk about them, they always call them other. The slaveholders were other, they were monsters. How could anybody have done that? And I think, they're misunderstanding when they think that way because slaveholders were ordinary people just like us, and, they were caught in a system that had them. So, slaveholders were humans just like us. They made decisions because society said it was okay. And that today we need to look around us and say, what decisions are being made around me today that are truly not okay, even though society says it is okay? And we need to be willing to say no to those things and be willing to tell our truth and stand up to it, just like the people in Minneapolis did.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
standing on that front line in the freezing, freezing cold and being willing to stand up to basically a federal army and say, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. So
Damn right.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the first one. The second one, I hope that people would simply open their hearts and their minds to having discussions about race, because I believe that we can't heal as a nation. I think we talked about this already, but we can't heal as a nation our racial issues until white and black are talking about it. It's not up to the blacks alone to heal,
Yeah.
and it can't happen without a mutual healing. We have to heal together,
Yeah.
and we have to
Can't
do it.
band-aid it. They would probably even put band-aids on it
Yeah.
instead of actually dealing with it. And that doesn't work when you have something that needs stitches or you need surgery.
Yeah, yeah. White people can't say, "Oh, that's their problem. They have to heal from that. It happened to them. I wasn't there." No. So, we have to heal together. We have to talk with each other, and we have to be willing to hear each other too. And that takes open hearts, open minds. Third point. Hmm. I'm struggling to come up with a third point.
That's fine. I mean, I try to get pulled out of people. It doesn't mean you have to do it.
Okay, okay.
But I think it's important, like you pointed out. I'm gonna close out and say that the QR code up there now is for your metorrey.com. So if people click on that or scan that, it'll bring them right to your website. I'm assuming on your website you can get right to your book.
Yep, yep. Yep,
So
there are links to the books, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, but I always encourage people to go to the third link that I have, which is called bookshop.org.
mhm.
If they go there, then it will benefit their local independent bookstore.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like to have physical books when I like to collect them. Just like a thing. Like it's harder to read them now because of my glaucoma, but I still like to have physical books.
right. Yeah,
Because
me too.
old school, I'm a child of the '70s. Like even though we have all this tech, there's something about a real book that feels important. Even though we were talking about audiobooks, I do encourage people to check it out. Because I think you get drawn into it and then unplug from all this tech and
Yeah,
get into a book. I
I
think it's super
yeah,
important. We talk to authors all the time. I think people should make time in their life, put some, give themselves some boundaries, and read a book. Find a book from a new author, like every however fast you can consume, but make it a regular part of your life. That's what we try to talk to authors on the show all the time. I want to thank you for being here
Oh,
on
thank
the
you
Like
so
to Ghost
much.
podcast.
It was absolutely my pleasure. I had a great time, and so thank you.
Yeah, we want to let everybody know we've been live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Kick. We will be on major podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify Video Podcast, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Newsly, a bunch of other ones by the end of the day tomorrow. And we'll have a link for a landing page for people who want to go and dive back into the interview and check it out. But thank you for being a guest on the Family Like to Ghost podcast. Have a great night.
Thanks. You too. Cheers.